it got more meaning when I was reading the book about that little crybaby of a character. Because that was me. I don't know if Sherman stole. He has a, he is a storyteller. And sometimes he steals stories from other people's lives. Sometimes he does that. This is a piece I wrote because I was in the Army and abusive to my wife, and it caused us to break up. And when she left me, I threw my violin in with all the belongings, thinking maybe she could give that to my daughter someday. But she sent it back to me, and I thought it was a big box of cookies. So all of my fellow soldiers, I said, there's a rule in our unit that you got to share what's inside, right? If it's a big box of cookies, it has to be enough for everyone. And I was the kind of guy that would make everybody cut M&Ms, a packet of M&Ms. I'd make them cut them into 4 pieces so that everybody could have their corner. It was good. When I realized it was a violin, and I'd already promised I'd share what was inside, I realized how far I was from what I was created to be. And I started to cry right in front of my troops. An interesting thing happened. Everybody, all my superior officers and NCOs, they all thought that I was going to lose my authority base, but the opposite happened. And I've been a student of that event ever since. This is called You Can Cry. It's my first composition. I wrote it to play for my fellow troops in the U.S. Army.
I am Joseph Trudeau of Dakota. I am Lakota on my father's side. We start off by saying, Ohoashte, Itakola, and Petuashte. That means, it's a great day, my friends. It is a good day. Professor of Psychology, Professor of Education, and Director of the Institutional Assessment, Research and Testing here at Western. It was absolutely a wonderful book for me to read. I couldn't read it straight through because I lived this story, and so did my friends. And if I had not made the decision to leave, to go away, I probably would have been dead. Because everything that Arnold, or Junior, by the way, everybody on the res has a nickname, so it wasn't surprising to me that everybody calls him Junior among many other names. I won't tell you what mine was. It's in Lakota and it means I was fat. Waji. Okay. Why was it difficult for me to read? Because I kept having flashbacks of people I knew, that I grew up with. Because you see, we all came from alcoholic families. It was the way of life. My family, my brothers and sisters, didn't want to come home about 4 o'clock in the afternoon because we didn't know what we'd find in the house. And so we'd find ways to not go home and eat dinner someplace else. This was especially true on the weekend. And so often we would go off someplace and no one seemed to care, no one seemed to matter, but everybody kind of knew where we were anyway. It was sort of a protective factor. So when I read this with a great deal of sadness and a great deal of reflection on life that could have been. Had it not been for someone who came along and said, you don't have to live this way. There are several lines that grabbed me in this book, and as a psychologist I can't help but I guess it's a professional hazard when you start reading into things from a psychological perspective. But let me quote what Sherman is saying through Arnold, or Arnold is saying. And this paragraph, or these series of sentences, certainly rang true to me. It sucks to be poor, and it sucks to feel that you somehow deserve to be poor. You start believing that you're poor because you're stupid and ugly. And then you start believing that you're stupid and ugly because you're Indian. And because you're Indian, you start believing you're destined to be poor. It's an ugly circle, and there's nothing you can do about it. That sense of hopelessness, that sense of despair, that there's nothing you can do about it, and this is what you're expected to be like when you become an adult, is normative. At least where I came from. So you learn how to drink, and you learn how to get drunk, not knowing what it meant. And you continued that lifestyle until something happened to you. And it happened to many people. So yes, Junior made a decision. But only because he got ticked off at a teacher. And he saw that he was using the same textbook that his mother used. And he was saying to himself, I don't want this, I want something else. And that's when a glimmer of hope started to shine through for me. The hope that life can change. But one had to make a decision, and he made what many of us know to be a very difficult decision, because he understood all too well the consequences. Yes, he was abused. He was abused in a sense. I mean, he had a loving family. Certainly his grandmother had a tremendous impact on his life, and I don't know of any, well, most people that I know from different reservations community have that grandparent or grandparents who are the beacons of hope and the beacons of light that guide one through the morass of problems that you can encounter. This is the life also of a lot of teenagers. So even though it's set in eastern Washington on the Spokane res, and off the res, it's the life of a teenager. And so I couldn't help but reflect on the books that I read when I was a teenager. Catcher in the Rye immediately comes to mind. Here was this privileged poor white kid who hated everybody. He was desperately trying to connect and couldn't do it. The book, The Outsiders, is another example of youth trying to connect and not being able to do it and getting into trouble. He was junior, trying hard to connect with his own people, trying to find that network where he felt like he fit in. Yes, he was a good basketball player. Yes, he was smart. But there were other things about him that were geeky, weird, big head, big hands, lanky, awkward, seemingly. He couldn't connect. So he knew that. And so he made that courageous decision to transfer, also realizing that his chances, it was a courageous decision, of connecting in an all-white school was going to be even more challenging and even more difficult, and he had the courage to say, I'm going to do this. There are a lot of other striking things in the book that came to me. It was, I don't know everyone, I'm a fan of Sherman Alexie's writing. I think he's brilliant with words. Arnold says, and I think this is somewhat what a reflection of Sherman Alexie's own thinking, and I quote, "The world is a series of broken dams and floods," he says, "and my cartoons are little lifeboats." Can't say it in words, so he drawls it. And but a better way to portray the inner feelings of this young man. A couple of them were quotes. See, I have a few minutes left. Almost. Rowdy. You all know Rowdy, the bully. Nobody likes Rowdy, but that doesn't matter because Rowdy will beat him up even if he doesn't like him. You know, at the end of the book, this story ends on real hope. Because, as I said, it's about connecting. And here was this one young man who had his own story. And Alexie, in a very, very gentle, nice, poignant way, says, "Now quit your blubbering," it said, "and play ball." I wiped my tears away, dribbled once, twice, and pulled up for a jumper. Rowdy and I played one-on-one for hours. We played until dark. We played until the street lights lit up the court. We played until the bat swooped down at our heads. We played until the moon was large and golden and perfect in the dark sky. We didn't keep score. That's friendship. That's a connection. And what a wonderful way to end this story.
Hello, my friends. I am the first scout. I'm from the Red Bottom Band of Nakota people. I'm enrolled on the Fort Peck Reservation in Montana. It's very appropriate and important, I think, that we acknowledge, despite our distinguished guest's words earlier, that this is Lummi land we're on. Anytime we gather like this, we should acknowledge that. This is their land, and we appreciate and thank them for their hospitality, generosity, a bunch of euphemisms for something they didn't have. They didn't have much of a choice, did they? But here we are. I also want to acknowledge my new niece. I see the first time I have seen her. She's visiting. Her mother has just been accepted into Western's graduate program for a master's in student services administration. I'm pleased you came today, and I thank all of you for being here. My friend, my good friend, Kolawate, Joe, age before beauty, you see. A deference thing, elders first, but we have a way of saying it in Indian country, it's age before beauty. I really want to say that, and my copy of the book, unfortunately, is in my book, so I'll use this one as a prompt. Thank you very much. Mine isn't signed, I suppose this one is signed. I like this book. I like this book for a couple of different reasons. Of course, several people probably speak to how, as Joe has, how well it speaks to youth. It says things that youth want to see in books. They want to read about themselves. It talks unabashedly of masturbation, almost the first thing right out of the chute. All right, let's get this over with. That's good. And there are other things that it speaks to youth about that are important. What I want to point out is that, not unlike Sherman Alexie himself, I've told my classes and my colleagues for years now that Sherman Alexie has stolen all my jokes. Any of his jokes, the very best of them especially, and they actually happened on the Fort Peck Reservation in Montana. A few of them over in Minnesota, the Youngstown lands, but mostly off Fort Peck. He stole them. And I complain about that all the time, but now then he writes this book, and he puts this book out, and besides it speaking to youth, I have calls all the time now, emails, telephone calls from my friends and my relatives on the Crow Reservation, the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, Spirit Lake Reservation. They get a hold of me and they say, "Oh, Dan, by the way, you read that book, that Sherman Alexie, he's from out there, huh?" I say, "Yeah, he's from out here, he's a Spokane, I've met him a couple of times, he's a pretty good guy." I say, "Oh yeah, but look, he stole all our stories." He said, "You know that part he got about the unemployment? He's talking about unemployment there. Hell, he must have been reading about Devil's Lake or Spirit Lake." And then I get a call from Northern Cheyenne. "Gee whiz, that Swil Kanim over there. Boy, he sure talks a lot about being poor over there. He talks about how bad it is and kind of the weird stuff you gotta eat." He said, "You know, Dan," he said, "he got that right here. He must have come through here one time, right here in Northern Cheyenne." I said, "Oh, yeah, well, maybe, And I get these calls all the time. And I guess what I'm trying to say by telling a story, and my students in here, yeah, I tell you stories. That's how I teach you, huh? Sociologically, this is important. This is important because it demonstrates and puts right in front of us that which Swil said induces some shame, perhaps. Huh? But he puts that right out there. Those problems. You get a sense of what I mean. We're looking at an extreme financial crisis right now, economically. We fear that it might go to 25% unemployment in the nation. Not since the Great Depression have we had unemployment like that. Do you want me to tell you what would happen in Indian country if we had 25% unemployment? We had it so damn good. And this is what's being put out here in front for us all to take a look at.
That means one of my brothers should have a job.
Without being just because he's related to someone. So I guess this for me is probably the strength of the book, is that it presents this in ways that are enjoyable, readable, humorous, poignant, sad, grabbing you. What's the word for that in literary terms? Anyway, gets a hold of you, engaging. But it lays that out there for people who otherwise have this notion of Indians as the Native American. The Native American. He does pan-Indianize it. He does come together and bring and point out for us very clearly the problems in Indian country with the alcoholism and the poverty and the unemployment. All those things. It's a marvelous book for doing that. Some people have problems with laying that out, like the Irish people say, "Put your dirty laundry out." Huh? I don't want you to put your dirty laundry out. Don't air your dirty laundry. Is that the way the saying goes? It's my niece. She's upset. Yell too loud, huh? Yell too loud. You don't air your dirty laundry. I say no. For 4 years now, I have vowed I will never teach a class, and I have not taught a class. I don't care what the topic is. I have never taught a class that I haven't talked about child sexual abuse on American Indian reservations, in American Indian country. That has got to be said, and these hard things have to be said. If we don't say them, if we say, oh gee, don't say that because that makes us look bad, nothing ever happens. It'll never change. We'll never break that cycle. We'll never break that cycle of violence, that cycle of trauma. If we don't talk about these things, this alcoholism, this joblessness, this violence, these assaults on human dignity, that has to be done. And Sherman Alexie, pretty good at doing it. Good night, y'all.
My Indian name is Kanim. It was given to me, honored to me 13 years ago. I'm just so honored today to be able to sit up here with this panel of my relations and my friends from different parts of the world, our country, whatever you want to call it. My God, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys for your eyes and your ears, because you'll take what you heard today and take it back to your homes and your families. This is the way our people did it. People sat in a place. The wise ones got together, discussed, put it out there. That's the way they did it in the old days, way a long time ago. I grew up in a time where alcoholism was very strong on our reservations, like the book says. The book touched me, brought me way back to the times where I struggled. I grew up in the city. Now, how hard is that back in the 60s for a Native American? Because your hair was black, because it was long, your skin was a different color, and then to go home to your reservation and have your family call you names because you live on the city streets. Talk about being lost, or a man with no country, huh? I grew up, had some friends. There was a young man. He was kind of like my savior. His name was John. I was picked on because I was a different color. John would always save me. I was jumped in the boys' bathroom many times. So the book really touched me. And I made a decision after middle school to not only pray for the people that tried to inflict harm on me, but pray for the ones that wanted to change. And I guess I was basically praying for my own trail to be blazed so that I could have a better life. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. But you know what? I am, because I'm Indian. Because it's been put in our DNA for so many years. You're born with it now if you're a Native American. And it's like my elder says, it's got time to break the cycle. It's just amazing. I love the book. I love Sherman Alexie's book. I've watched his movies. It had a great impact. I am a fond admirer of his work, and I'm very proud of Sherman Alexie and my relative here for wanting change, wanting to present more to the people. Just know us for who we are is what we want. Accept us for who we are. Our stories are different, yes. Our stories are of despair, but we all have hope. We go to bed with hope. We wake up with hope. when I was growing up.
Is that her name?
When it's not fate.
Mommy left.
Academic panel.
But I remember the stories that my grandfather would always tell me, and that's part of what gave me hope. He used a lot of metaphors, and one time I asked my grandpa, I go, "Grandpa, how come you never finish the story?" He says, "Well, grandson, if I told you the end of the story, then you wouldn't create a story of your own." He says, "You can change the end of that story any way you want. You can make it what you want." And what I got from the book is that I need to write down my story for my children, for my family, so that someday my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren will be able to know the truth. And I hope that I have honored them with what my life has brought for them. I'll see you.
I want to say publicly in front of my cousin here, thank you. It touched my heart to hear you say that you're proud of the work that I'm doing, and that will give me energy to keep on going on, and I really appreciate that. I think, like all really good books, everything you really need to judge the book is right on the cover. The absolutely true diary of a part-time Indian, a novel by Sherman, Alexie, art by Ellen Fournay. Free book, read and release, catch and release, kind of like that. Whatcom reads, one book together. www.whatcomreads.com. Everything you really need to judge this book is on the cover. But what I want to make clear is that there is a distinction between what is true and what is real. It is impossible for anything to be true without being real. If you've been dishonored in your life, you're an Indian. Don't go out and tell other people I said that, but own it. You'll understand why honor is so important to us, why respect is so important to us. You know, people want to imply that when Taithaluk signed the treaty that it was an act of defeat, but it wasn't. It was an act of generosity. It wasn't an act of sacrifice. He was acting for future generations. When Seedholm gave the land to what is now Western Washington University, he believed that education was going to be what would bridge the gap between our way of life and this new way of life. Seedholm was one of the first capitalists, Native Americans. He became a very wealthy man, and he owned Seedholm Hill. And that's why it's called Seedholm Hill. our job as a Native person is to survive. Not just with our hearts beating, though that's important. Our job is to hold what is sacred. And there is a distinction between what is sacred and what is secret. I believe when this society catches up what has been held as so secret by the Native people, I believe that elders will start to share what's really important. I believe we haven't even touched on this stuff. I believe when we as a nation, the United States of America, can understand the difference between defeat and generosity, not just of things, but of spirit, the mystery between us, that's when we will find true prosperity. I want you to know, with all of my heart, I believe in you. I believe in who you are in this room right now. I, as a Native American, as a Lummi, as an American, I need you to be everything you were created to be. I want your truth. I want your feelings in the room. I want your interpretation. I want your decision-making process. I want it to be a part of my life. The Native definition or the Lummi definition of a friend is someone that's pulling with you. We're a canoe people. If you've ever been on a canoe where someone wants to go the other direction and someone wants to go another direction and someone wants, it's hell. But if you all work together, if we all pull together, we'll get there. I think one step above the promised land is the promised water, the promised spirit. And that is what's between us. Let's work together. Let's be together. The only way I will really know you're in it is if you be all of who you are with all of your heart and I can see the Spirit moving you. That's when I know. Spirit moved you here today. At this very moment, we are friends. So, myspace.com/ the Violindian. Violindian. Yeah, not the, actually. Is it the Violindian? Because I am one with my violin, get it? Violindian. I'm done. I'm done.
And I'm part of the Cawville Confederated Tribes, which is over in eastern Washington. And I've read this book a couple times. The first time I read it is when I started high school, and I really liked it for multiple reasons. I never grew up on a reservation. I grew up in the stereotypical, two-parent household. I had a brother, so there's the two of us, and we grew up in a white suburban neighborhood. And there is just I don't know, I just could connect to multiple things he said, because obviously I look different than most of the kids I went to school with. I just was interested in different things, and And then when I was asked to be on this panel, I read the book again, so I became familiar with it. And as being a student, I obviously sought out the themes of the book, so then I could figure out more information from that. And the first main theme I thought was hope. Hope you can see throughout the book. In pretty much every chapter, there's some part of it. And one of the there's like two quotes that I really liked. One of them is, "You're going to find more and more hope farther and farther you walk away from this sad, sad reservation. You have to leave the res forever." And I have two older siblings, and they grew up on the reservation, and they're still on the reservation. And whenever I talk to them, they tell me to take advantage of what I have of not having to do that, because they didn't go to college, they barely graduated high school, but then they saw me, didn't have to grow up on the reservation. Obviously, I'm at college right now, and just take advantage of like what you have. And another quote that falls under hope is when Junior said, "White people are the only ones allowed hope." And when I was growing up, it didn't really like occur to me, because I never like classified myself as Native American. Like nobody like at school would ask like what I was. But obviously, you know, when you're little and you're out on the playground and people play like those make-believe games, or like you're like this princess or whatever, I was always Pocahontas, because I had dark hair, dark skin, and that's just like what I was. I was never like Cinderella, or never like all the other ones. And so I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. And another theme I found in the book was friendship. Obviously, friendship could be like within the family, but then the main one is Junior and Rowdy, and like the hardships they had to go through. And then in one of the chapters, Junior said, "I think Rowdy might be the most important person in my life, maybe more important than my family. Can your best friend be more important than your family?" And I've thought about this quote a lot, and as being at college, like, I don't know if you guys do this, but I do. I can, like, my close friends, they're like my family to me. Like, you can go to them about anything, you can rely on them for whatever, because they're right there, as your family, for most of us, is an hour away, like miles away. And so I thought that was interesting. And the third main theme I saw throughout the book was identity, because Junior was trying to find out who he was and how he belonged, like what group he belonged to. And later in the book, when he was like, I'm from the Spokane tribe, and he's like, I'm also part of the basketball team, I'm also part, like that whole list of everything. And then somewhere in the book, I don't remember like who said it or whatever, but Junior was classified like as an apple. He was red on the outside, but white on the inside, when he had to go to Rudin to go to school. And I thought that was an important part. And then another quote from Identity that I really liked is, "Life is a constant struggle between being an individual and being a member of the community." And I thought that pretty much like summed up the book for me, because you can see like the struggle he had with his family, the struggle he had within himself and with his friends, and being able to connect to who he was and figure out what he was going to do.
I'm an elementary education faculty member here at Western, and the director of the Center for Education, Equity, and Diversity. Woo! I'll put a little plug in for tomorrow if anyone wants to come to a book talk in the center at noon in Miller Hall 250 to just talk about the book some more and have dessert. So I first want to thank everyone on the panel. This is truly an honor for me to sit up here with my colleagues and mentors, and actually Dr. Trimble was my mentor when I was here in the early 90s as an undergraduate at Western. And I have to say that if it wasn't for Dr. Trimble, I probably wouldn't be sitting up here on this panel with you today. And some other wonderful folks that are here as well. I have a different experience with this book. My experience with the book is as a teacher, having been a classroom teacher, and also working with pre-service teachers in the classroom, which several are here today, which I'm also honored that you're all here. Thank you. And I want to say that in the class we read the book, and the students look at it as a critical personal narrative, that this is Sherman Alexie's story. And in a conversation with Dr. Trimble, that this isn't an Indian story, this is Sherman Alexie's story. And he happens to be Indian. And I think that it's important to look at it from that perspective. And I'm going to go full circle with you, so follow me. I did not grow up on the reservation. My mother is Blackfeet and Gros-Ventre from Browning, Montana. And she was born and raised on the reservation. And she was the Sherman Alexie in this story. She left. And she left and she moved to Spokane, so I could definitely understand the Spokane connection. And in Spokane, every day of her education, she was called a dirty Indian. Every day. Imagine what it's like to be a teenager and grow up hearing that you're a dirty Indian and not understand or to begin to identify yourself as not good because you belong to a certain community, because you look different, because you might speak differently. So it was very important for my mother to succeed and prove that she could walk in both worlds. So she graduated from college and became a lab tech, and I adore my mother, and I wish she was here today because I think she would be thrilled to participate with these wonderful panelists. So let me tell you also that I'm a huge fan of Sherman Alexie, and I have never actually met him. Now that I have this Kanim, like movie star. If you didn't know, he's a movie star in the business of fancy dancing. So I'm still kind of a little having a hard time here.
That's how I am every morning when I look in the mirror.
Is that why you're sitting one over?
I have to. Yeah, but then there's just, I don't know. So Sherman Alexie, I'm a huge fan of his books. I've read every single book. I went and saw him when I was an undergraduate every chance I got at Village. And even when I was in graduate school at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, I drove to New Hampshire, which really isn't that far, but I drove all the way to New Hampshire to see him at Keene State. And every time I learned something. And so when this book came out, I couldn't wait. I waited. I was calling the bookstores, constantly trying to get a hold of the copy of the book. And when I read it, I cried, and I laughed, and then I cried some more. And then I also I was left feeling that there were spaces in here that I was concerned. And the story to me is about hope. But I'm also fearful that some people will take the stories of hope in here, and they might turn it around and say that Native people can't live on the reservation and be successful. Or that the only way that you can succeed is if you leave. Because I'm a product of someone who left. I don't speak my language. That died with my grandfather's brother. And that there's a piece of my heart that is consistently broken because I know very few words, and some of those words I can't share with you. So, as an educator, I feel that, you know, it's my responsibility today to say to you that there are movements, and there have been movements since the 60s to revitalize language. And the powerful revitalization of language is happening on reservations and in Native communities, where they're beginning to see those spaces as spaces for hope and survivance. Survivance being survival and resistance. Resisting oppression and colonization and rebuilding our communities together. So and of course, on my reservation, we have one of those bilingual programs, and I do want to say that one of my mentors when I was here as an undergraduate is also Dr. Bill Demert, who is an incredible scholar and activist for Native languages. And he was one of the writers of the Bilingual Education Act, and he's been fighting for Native languages for years and years and years. And I have had the privilege of working with him with 7 different schools across the nation who are working to sustain Native language. And you might be saying, why is the Native language so important? Because as Dan First Scout Rowe speaks of this notion of culture and sociology, language and culture are so interconnected that we don't know where one begins and the other ends. And when we lose our language, we lose our ability to speak with our grandparents and our ancestors in the language that they spoke in. My great-grandmother was a survivor of the Baker's Massacre of 1870, and she never spoke English. She knew English, but she refused to speak English. But she would tell the story of her survival of that massacre, and she told that story to my grandparents. She told that story to my mother. My mother, who never spoke the language herself, understood. And so I feel that it's time for us to recapture that. And I don't see that that Sherman Alexie's book is not a part of that. I see that his story is an important story. And it's a story of his experience and the experience of many Native peoples. And I want another story to be told too, and that is about survival and resistance, and about honoring where we are and making sure that we rebuild our sustainable communities. That's what, thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. I was actually going to ask the team back there.
By donation, your students, right? So it's like
So,
for whatever you want,
sliding
whenever you can. I want to point out one thing in what you were talking about. One of the best parts of a book are the pictures, and this is one of the cases where that's the case. The picture of my grandmother makes a living by selling beaded keychains on eBay. Highly sacred Aboriginal transportation charms. And I think that's one real powerful thing that it truly is, and it's just one little joke on a cartoon, but it really is a truly powerful tool that's affecting Indian economy. People are able to sell their artwork on eBay and get real prices for their handmade, and they're selling it directly and not through the old school channels that can kind of rip you off. So and that is one thing that the internet has an economic impact on reservations. It's a good thing.
And also, he will be playing after the discussion for those of you who might be able to stay. And as you know, he's a wonderful musician. Okay, so questions?
I'll go back to your comment for a minute that stop the violence, man.
Yes.
But there is stop the violence.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
The fact that we need to merge as one, makes what you're asking very difficult.
Mhm.
And for you to, I think, to put together our nations, if you will, makes it very difficult for you then to become the nations that you want to be individually again. How do you propose that we do that?
It's really not even proposed that I do it, it's that we acknowledge it. Because the reality is that one of the biggest things that I just got, the biggest kick out of Obama winning this election, was they were saying, well, it wasn't exactly just the black vote that got him in. It wasn't exactly just the white vote. It wasn't exactly just the women that were doing it. It was kind of, and the reality for me was that it was the American vote that elected Obama. It wasn't a dissection. And I wrote a poem a long time ago. It was one of Chattaskatum, Witch Tatum's favorite poems, and it goes, when I was a child, I dissected a frog, and it hurt. I'm lactamish. That means I'm of the place of frogs. When my parents were passed out, one on the couch and the other on the floor, it was a chorus of frogs that sang for me a lullaby. When I was a child, I dissected a frog and it hurt, but oh yes, I got an A for the day. The meaning behind that poem for me, and I've talked to doctors, I've talked to psychologists, I've talked to sociologists, I've talked to lots of scientists about this poem, because the meaning behind it is that there are two ways of learning. There's two ways of healing. One is by dissecting, and I benefit from the dissected way of learning every time I take an aspirin. It could save my life, taking an aspirin. I benefit from that way of learning, but that does not mean that we need to disregard the healthy song from a frog. That can heal me too. And so what I want to do is not disregard that your experience in America is different from mine. That's not my intention. But that we have a song. Who you are, who I am, is a harmony within a symphony. And that's what is needed. The recognition of, not that our differences are what divide us, but our differences are what we have in common. You, my friend, are different from me. And out that we share these differences are what makes us common. That's a beautiful thought if you really think about it. And we own it. We the people must muster up the courage to embrace our differences and sing that song.
This first and then you.
I've been hearing some great stories and examples of how Alexie's story here really relates to a lot of people, older generations. I'm wondering how you guys feel this can touch the younger generations and how it can affect them and how they may be able to use these stories to help themselves.
You know, an awful lot of Indians were relocated in the 1950s and the 1960s into cities under the federal government's termination policy. It was a part of that era. And so we have created, Indian country now includes, all our reservations, all our sovereign homelands, and all of the people who were relocated have formed about 50% of American Indians now live in urban areas. They're urban Indians. And this has created some problems within the ranks of Indians in some cases. Some Indian scholars, I they're somewhat essentialist, I think, my own perspective, that they have less standing as urban Indians than Indians from the reservation, from the country, rural areas. These kinds of things can cause real problems for youth. A youth growing up in the city, in these relocation cities were Minneapolis, Chicago, Detroit, San Francisco, Oakland. It's San Francisco now, should I? Oakland is more appropriate. They relocated Indians, but they didn't give them any upscale real estate. My own family went to Los Angeles. I went to school on Estrella Street in East LA. And I went into school the first day, and all instruction was in Spanish. So, but those Indians who stayed in these urban centers, a couple of generations after, they're urban Indians. They go to powwows. They have an Indian center in most cities. And they have outreach, and they have some effort by the Indian Health Service for clinics, etc. But they don't have this attachment to their homeland anymore. Sometimes they're second generation, third generation. They may be nearly full-blood Indian, if you count blood quantum, but they don't have enough quantum of any particular brand. They couldn't be enrolled anywhere. But they're more Indian than I am, maybe, you know, blood-wise, if you count that. So for them, there's a problem with identity that I see something like this can address. This is how that happens. This is how people get away from it. As Kristen pointed out very well. People do escape. People do leave it. And that's okay. And I see this, is pointing this out, rather more of a hope for that, keeping that culture than a loss of it. What I'm going to suggest is that a native student in an urban setting who looks in the mirror and says, look, here I am, you know, I'm a skin, right? I know I'm a skin because I see those skins down there all the time, and I see these pictures of skins and cowboys. And so I know I'm a skin, but gee, I don't know none of that, you know. That's okay. I can read this. I see how that happens. And it's okay because his grandmother is honored. It's okay because those people are there and he understands it even though he leaves. It's okay even though most all natives who are in the academy will tell you that we face a tremendous amount of discrimination at home. We have close supporters in some of our family and some others that are there that have these few jobs that Kristen is holding out for us, that there is hope on the reservation. They can honor what we have done. But most native students, most native faculty, and there are very few, most natives that do these things are often disparaged by our people. And this can give hope to youth. And to maintain that cultural connection despite the fact that in order to really have a job, you better live somewhere else. Those, if you can make it there, fine. But I often regret, why do I do this? Why am I here teaching from Montana? Why do I teach here? And here's Western Washington University. I have native students. I asked when I first came here, when they interviewed me, asked me, I asked them, I said, do you have any native students? It was all quiet on the other end. Dr. Estrada and a couple of students on a phone interview, it was very quiet. Well, he said, finally, we need mentors. This was 10 years ago, and there weren't many natives here. And it has changed, it has helped, it has become different. But here I am teaching my people on Fort Peck Reservation, and perhaps I could be there. I don't know, you know. Shouldn't I be there? But there's no place there. No place there for me.
She had a question.
Sorry.
Another response, I think?
Yeah, I just want to point out that Indian kids, if you're going to a tribal school, if you're going even to a public school, they point out Sherman, Alexie. The closest thing I had to a role model was Sonny Sixkiller, who was a quarterback for the University of Washington and way back in the day. You don't even know who he is, but he was awesome, man. Native person. I believe what Sherman does is he kind of builds up an ire in these young kids. Like, they're thinking, Sherman's not all that great. I'm better than him. I'm better at hoop. I'm better at whatever. I'm better at writing a story. I'm better at telling a story. I'm better at being a bad kid than Sherman Alexie was. And so there's kind of like, it's not just inspiration.